My name is Elise Harper. I'm a 36-year-old. And the first time I met my future mother-in-law, she poured a glass of red wine on my lap in front of 12 people and called it a tradition. No one gasped. No one apologized. Not even the man I was supposed to marry. He just smiled, leaned closer, and whispered, "She does that sometimes. Just go along with it." The wine soaked through my white silk dress. It wasn't a splash. It wasn't accidental. It was poured slow, deliberate crimson and permanent. Cabernet Sauvignon, 2012. French, dry and expensive. Like her smile. I looked at my lap, then at her, then at him. I reached for my napkin and calmly patted the fabric like I was cleaning a spilled drink on someone else's table. I didn't leave. I didn't speak. I just smiled and said, "Good thing I don't mind a test." That dinner, the first dinner, was held at the Wells estate. 12 chairs, oakwood table, silver cutlery engraved with initials that had been passed down for 4 generations. Claudia Wells sat at the head. Nathan, her son, and my fiancé sat to her right. I sat to her left. We were 3 months away from our wedding. I had known Nathan for nearly 3 years. We met at a TED conference in Vancouver. He had spoken about how architecture could heal trauma. I had spoken about supply chain transparency and artificial intelligence. He came up to me after my talk and said, "You don't sound like a CEO. You sound like someone who's tired of watching people suffer from hidden systems." I smiled. He wasn't wrong. Nathan was the first man I loved who didn't need to be impressed. He didn't ask how much my company was worth. He didn't blink when I told him I had started from a rented garage in Pittsburgh. He listened. And then he built with me. He redesigned my company's headquarters with more glass, more air, more trees. I helped him digitize the payroll and licensing systems for his family's architecture firm. We never talked about merging worlds. We just did it. And then came the red wine. That night after dinner, I checked into a hotel. Nathan thought I was staying the night with him, but I said I had early meetings. I didn't. I just needed to think. At 8 over the next morning, I received a text. It was from Claudia. "Elise, I would like to meet with you privately. Come to my office." 11 a.m. sharp. Her office looked like a museum. Marble floors, zero clutter, glass sculptures that didn't seem to reflect anything. She poured me tea, sat down, smiled. Again. "Elise," she said, "Nathan loves you. That matters to me. But you must understand that love isn't enough in this family." She folded her hands. "There's a reason our name is what it is. A reason our firm has survived 4 generations. We don't just let people in. They invest. And they prove they belong." She slid a folder across the table. Inside was a prospectus. Wells Atelier was opening a division in New York. Projected valuation, 3 years to profit. High potential, high risk. She said $500,000. That's the price to buy in. It shows you're serious. It shows you understand legacy. I looked at her. She smiled wider. "I've already spoken to Nathan," she said. "He agrees. It's the smart move." I didn't respond. I didn't flinch. I closed the folder, thanked her for the tea, and walked out of that glass box. And as I sat in the car, my hands resting on the leather steering wheel, I asked myself the first of many questions. If Nathan had known about this, why didn't he tell me? And if he didn't know how, could he not? Because either way, someone had just tried to buy my place in the family. And someone else had put a price on my silence. 3 years before the wine, the proposal, the silence, and the price tag, there was a stage. TED Vancouver, I wasn't the kind of speaker who made people cry. I was sharp, structured, efficient. I walked on stage in a navy blue suit, minimal makeup, and a black clicker in my hand. My topic, how transparent supply chains can save lives. Not exactly poetic, but it was honest. I talked about why hidden costs lead to human suffering, about how broken logistics destroy food access in refugee zones, about how lies in shipping records let bad actors exploit vulnerable workers. I didn't use the word justice, but that's what I meant every time I said efficiency. I remember scanning the crowd just for a second. Most people were nodding politely. A few were checking their phones. But one man in the 3rd row wasn't blinking. He had this way of watching like he was listening beyond the words. When the talk ended, I walked backstage. I took a breath, checked my watch. That's when I saw him again. He was leaning against the side wall. Tall, charcoal gray jacket, no tie. He smiled and said, "You didn't just talk about logistics. You talked about autonomy." I raised an eyebrow. "Did I?" He nodded. "You weren't just moving products. You were moving power." That was Nathan Wells. He had spoken earlier that day something about restorative space design. I hadn't caught his talk, but I knew his name. Everyone in design did. He was the son of Claudia Wells, the Claudia Wells. Fourth-generation architecture. Historic preservation meets innovation. His firm had redesigned half the West Coast libraries, and his name was on every top 40 under 40 list for the past 5 years. We had coffee that evening. He asked more questions than he answered. He didn't try to impress me. He didn't pitch anything. He just asked, "What made you care enough to build all this?" I told him about a food shipment that never reached a clinic in Cameroon. How one missing sensor cost 3 children their lives. And how that moment made me give up my high-salary job and start ArvisChain in a borrowed garage with a cracked MacBook and $25. He didn't say wow. He didn't say inspiring. He just said, "Let me show you something." He took out his phone and showed me photos of a hospital wing he'd helped design for trauma patients. Soft curves, natural light, no harsh edges. Survivors, he said, don't need statements. They need safety. That was our first conversation. It didn't end in fireworks. It ended in silence. A quiet mutual pause, like two people realizing they were on parallel roads that had just met. We spent the next day walking the Vancouver waterfront. He talked about buildings. I talked about algorithms. We debated whether infrastructure could be healing, whether AI could be moral. At some point, we both stopped talking, just stood there, watching the harbor. And he said if we ever built something together, not just a project but a life, I think it would be beautiful. I didn't say anything then, but I remember the wind in my hair, the sound of water, the exact way the sky looked. And I remember thinking, this is a man who builds without controlling, who listens without interrupting, who sees the architecture in people, not just in buildings. That was how it started. No red wine, no family name, just two minds meeting in the open. And for a while, that was enough. After Vancouver, we kept building. Not buildings, not software, not yet. We built understanding. It started with long-distance calls between Seattle and San Francisco. He'd send me photos of buildings in progress tracing light angles at sunrise. I'd email him dashboards and back-end maps, lines of code that made goods move in silence. It should have felt like two different worlds, but it didn't, because the questions were the same. How do you move something fragile through something brutal and still preserve its value? That's what I asked about food shipments in war zones. That's what he asked about rebuilding schools after wildfires. 2 months in, he flew up and visited my company. ArvisChain was still in its growth stage. 50 employees, mostly engineers, no glossy HQ. We worked in an old industrial space with exposed brick and too little heat in winter. He walked in and said, "This building is brilliant, but it's fighting you." He wasn't wrong. That week, he drew a redesign on a whiteboard using dry erase markers and recycled cardboard. "Glass here," he said, "lets the light through without heating the server cores. Move this wall. Breathe more air into the hallway. And that conference room, it deserves a skylight." We implemented his draft 6 months later. Productivity went up. So did retention. And the hallway, it felt like spring. I returned the favor by helping him restructure the back end of Wells' atelier. Their HR system was a mess, analog, clunky, and built for 1998. I offered to consult. Nathan refused to let me do it for free. "Let's call it a trade," he said. Design for design. He was thoughtful like that. Never wanted charity, never wanted to be rescued, but never afraid to receive help either, as long as it was mutual. We worked together without friction. No power plays, no ego. It was the kind of collaboration people write books about. And it wasn't just work. It became our rhythm. We spent weekends drawing out ideas in notebooks, new ways to combine form and function. I showed him how artificial intelligence could reroute shipments to save fuel and time. He showed me how curves in walls could lower heart rates in trauma patients. He once said, "Most people want to be impressive. I just want to be useful." I told him I don't care if I'm impressive either. I just want to matter. He looked at me like I'd just spoken his native language. That's when I realized This wasn't infatuation, it was symmetry. We started designing other things together. Not offices, not systems. A life, vacations, time blocks, boundaries. We made Sunday our no laptop day. We set rules about texts after 10 p.m. He added plants to my desk. I added buffer time to his calendar. It sounds boring, doesn't it? But that's the thing. Real love doesn't have to perform. It just has to work. One night after a long planning session for his firm's new California museum project, I asked him if he ever got tired of carrying his family's name. He paused, then said, "Sometimes." But then I remember I'm allowed to shape it too. He never badmouthed his mother, never spoke a word against Claudia, but every time her name came up, there was a pause, a shift. Like he was calculating something before he spoke. I noticed, but I didn't press. I thought maybe this was just how people navigated complicated parents. I didn't grow up with any. My father died when I was 16. My mother left long before that. I didn't know how legacies worked. I only knew how to start over. So I thought maybe I was lucky to find someone who had history but wasn't held hostage by it. For 3 years we worked, traveled, dreamed. I took him to Sweden when I closed our first European deal. He took me to Kyoto when his firm completed a temple restoration. We collected architecture journals and patent filings like other couples collected wine. We built a world's small silent sovereign, and I thought that was enough. It happened on the third morning in Iceland. We had rented a cabin near the southern coast. No signal, no internet, no one around for miles. Just us, and the cold, and the silence. Nathan knew I loved silence. He said it made me look taller, stronger. I said it made me feel like I could hear my thoughts breathing. That morning we woke up early, the kind of early that makes the air feel like glass. He made coffee. I stood by the window watching light rise over the black sand beach. There was nothing dramatic, no violin, no camera crew, just steam rising from our mugs and the sound of ice shifting somewhere in the valley. And then he knelt. I didn't even realize what was happening at first. He was so quiet I thought he'd dropped something. Then I saw the box. Simple, matte, no logo. He looked up at me and said, "This isn't about tradition. It's not about families or names or what we're supposed to do. It's about what we've already built, and what we could still build if you say yes." Inside was a ring, thin band, no diamond, just brushed titanium curved like a river stone. I stared at it for a long time, not because I was unsure, but because it felt so undeservedly perfect. I nodded, didn't cry, didn't jump. I just whispered, "I don't need anything else, just you." He stood, slid the ring onto my finger, and for the next 10 minutes we said nothing. Not out of awkwardness, but because when something is entirely right, words just get in the way. That night I wrote a single sentence in my notebook. This is what it feels like when the future becomes a real place. We stayed in Iceland for another week, walked on glaciers, dined in silence, talked about where to live after the wedding. San Francisco, maybe London. We made lists, not plans, just possibilities. He said he wanted the wedding small, just people who mattered, no press, no spectacle. He didn't want it to be about his family. He wanted it to be ours. And I believed him. Why wouldn't I? We flew back, started looking at venues, sent out soft save dates. He even asked to meet with my board, said he wanted to understand the financial rhythms of my company so he could plan around my quarterly peaks. I laughed, said that was the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to me. The ring never left my finger. Not even in the shower. It wasn't expensive, but it felt like gravity, like something that tethered me to the version of myself I liked best. I remember one night we were lying on the floor of my apartment, lights off, just a candle burning in the corner. He said, "I don't want to be the next Wells. I want to be the first version of myself that makes sense." I told him, "Then don't let anyone else draw your blueprint." He smiled. But in that moment, only for a split second, I thought I saw hesitation, a flicker, like a man who wanted to believe what he just heard, but knew something I didn't. I ignored it, called it exhaustion, or wedding stress, or whatever excuse people use when the intuition is too quiet to argue with. And that was the last time I thought everything was exactly where it should be. That moment in Iceland holding hands in the middle of nowhere was the last time I thought love was enough. After Iceland, the air changed. Not all at once, just enough for me to notice that every room I walked into at the Wells estate felt like it had already made up its mind about me. Claudia smiled often. She complimented my watch, my speaking voice, even my posture. But none of it felt sincere. It was the way she asked questions, never directly, always through someone else, like asking Nathan if I planned to keep such a visible leadership role after marriage, like suggesting to the wedding planner that perhaps I'd want a prenup just to feel more secure. Then one afternoon during a fundraising panel in San Francisco, I ran into someone unexpected, Tara Liu, an old contact from my accelerator days. She was now a venture partner at a mid-sized firm, sharp, quick, and allergic to small talk. We chatted in the break room, just polite updates at first. But when I mentioned I was engaged to Nathan Wells, she stopped mid-sip. Her eyes narrowed just a little. "You're marrying into that family," I laughed it off. That dramatic Tara leaned in. "You ever hear about what happened to Helena Morris?" I shook my head. She was married to Thomas Wells, Claudia's eldest, brilliant founder biotech. She started a company in Boston, raised Series A like a queen. Claudia told her flat out she had to choose, either fold the company or lose the family. I stared at her. She tried to compromise, Tara said. Move to California, let Claudia advise her board. Within 6 months, the company was dead. And so was the marriage. I didn't speak for a few seconds. Tara reached into her bag and pulled out a business card. "Watch your blind spots," she said, tapping the edge of the card against my palm. "Claudia doesn't break women, she just quietly deletes them." That night I couldn't sleep. Nathan lay next to me, arm draped over my waist, breathing softly, and I kept hearing that phrase, "quietly deletes them." The next morning I started digging, not just gossip, records, timelines, names. I found 3 women who had married into the Wells family in the last 20 years. None of them still bore the name. None of them still worked in the industries they came from. And none of them could be found on LinkedIn anymore. One had written a personal blog years ago, mostly travel photos and recipes. But one post stood out. It read, "Being married to legacy means forgetting what legacy you were trying to build for yourself." It had 2 likes and no comments. I kept reading. Financial disclosures from Wells Atelier, public records, board shuffles, nothing illegal. But something worse, too clean. Every new partner brought in through marriage. Every business tie quietly merged, then quietly erased. Names disappeared from filings. Projects got reassigned. And when I traced back the original code used in one of their hospital lighting systems, I saw a line of logic that came from a startup I'd advised in 2016. A startup now defunct, founded by one of the ex-Wells daughters-in-law. That was when I felt it. Not fear, not anger, recognition. I was standing in a blueprint, a well-worn structure, and I was being guided through the same corridor, one small suggestion at a time. It wasn't overt. Claudia didn't shout. She didn't forbid. She invited, then edited, encouraged, then redirected, until there was nothing left of the original, just the version she could frame on a wall. And I realized this wasn't about whether she liked me. It was about whether I was containable. After what I found the pattern, the deleted women, the whispers behind pristine glass, I couldn't unsee it. And Claudia, she must have sensed the shift in me, because that's when the private meetings started. Not invitations, summons, always polite, always framed as quick chats between 2 future women of the same family. The first one came 2 days after I returned from New York. She met me in the back library of the estate, a room filled with art books and silence so thick you could hear the dust settling. She offered me tea, always tea, served in delicate porcelain cups with initials engraved so faintly you had to squint to see them. "Elise," she said, her tone musical. "You are a remarkable woman, truly. I can see why Nathan is so drawn to you." I thanked her, carefully. She smiled, sipped, then continued. "But legacy? Legacy is about more than talent. It's about fit." She leaned forward. "This family has carried a name for over a century. That name built hospitals, libraries, schools. It cannot be allowed to fracture. Not now, not ever." I said nothing, so she added, You understand that, right? I nodded slowly, though I wasn't sure what I was agreeing to. And something told me she wanted it that way. That became our rhythm, brief, quiet meetings. Never with Nathan present, always framed as guidance, always laced with a message. Sometimes she'd mention the pressures of press or the importance of image. Other times she'd gesture toward the firm's New York expansion and say, "Of course we only bring in people who are truly committed." At first I tried to read between the lines. Then I realized she wasn't hiding anything. I was just too polite to confront it. The second meeting happened in a garden. Late afternoon, roses-trimmed hedges, and a white swing that looked like it had never been used. She handed me a folder, inside photos of past weddings and the Wells family. I flipped through them, one bride after another, all in pale dresses, all smiling, but none of them were still in the family. When I looked up, Claudia said they were lovely, but not all things last. There was no malice in her voice, just memory. Like she was reading me a weather report, something inevitable, impersonal, and true. The third meeting wasn't a meeting at all. She appeared at my office without notice, unscheduled, alone. My assistant asked if she should call security. I said no. Claudia walked in like she owned the lease. She looked around, touched the edge of a whiteboard, then turned to me. "Elise," she said, "this company you've built, it's impressive, but power that isn't absorbed, it gets isolated. And isolated power doesn't survive." I asked her, "Is that a threat?" She smiled. "That's a proverb." That night I told Nathan she had dropped by. He looked surprised, but only mildly. "She's curious," he said. "She's just trying to understand you." I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe he didn't know how deliberate this was. But another part of me, the part that had read contracts, audited terms, survived bad faith VCs, that part saw it clearly. These weren't conversations. They were containment exercises. Each one quieter than the last, but tighter. And each time Nathan wasn't there, I wondered, was that by accident or by design? Because the truth is, it's easier to be controlled when you're made to feel like you're the only one not playing along. It was supposed to be a simple meeting. Just me, Nathan, and a corporate attorney, someone neutral to walk us through our respective holdings before the wedding. Nothing complicated, nothing confrontational. We both had businesses. We both had assets. We just wanted to be clear. Or so I thought. The night before, I emailed him a draft of my disclosures. A spreadsheet, simple, clean, annotated. Everything I owned. Everything I owed. Even the equity I had set aside for future philanthropic work. He didn't respond. No questions, no comments. Just a one-line text. "Thanks. We'll see you at the meeting." When I arrived at the lawyer's office the next morning, he wasn't there. 10 minutes passed, then 15. I called. It went to voicemail. I waited 27 minutes. Then I asked the attorney if we could reschedule. She said gently, "That might be best." I stepped outside into the cold gray air of Pacific Heights and stood on the curb staring at the fog. I wasn't angry, not yet, just hollow. When I finally reached him that evening, he picked up on the second ring. Sounded calm, almost casual. "Oh, I completely forgot," he said. "I had to help Mom with a board call. The East Coast team moved it up last minute." I was silent. Then asked, "Why didn't you tell me?" He paused. Laughed nervously. "Elise, you're making it sound like sabotage. It was just bad timing. I said you didn't even text." Another pause. Then I figured you'd assume the best. That sentence hung in the air like smoke in a sealed room. I figured you'd assume the best. As if faith were something I owed him. As if being disappointed was my own fault for expecting too much. The next day I brought it up again. I told him how it made me feel. Not just the absence, but the dismissal. He shrugged. "Baby, you overthink things. You always have. My mom's just intense. Let her be. She'll calm down once we're married." That word, once, like marriage would magically melt everything that was wrong now. Like commitment was a curtain we could pull over all the broken furniture. I looked at him then. Really looked. And for the first time in 3 years, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Distance. Not geographical, not emotional, but moral. A space between the person I believed he was and the man sitting across from me. And I wasn't sure anymore if I could cross it, or if I was supposed to. That weekend, we had dinner with Claudia and two of Nathan's cousins. It was elegant as always. Candlelight, crystal. Claudia brought out an old photo album halfway through dessert. Black and white images of the family's early days. She pointed to a picture of Nathan as a boy, said even then we knew he would carry the name well. Then looked straight at me, and we knew he'd need someone who wouldn't get in the way. I smiled, but inside something cracked. Not because of what she said I'd heard worse, but because Nathan said nothing. Not a word, not a glance in my direction, just another forkful of cake. That night, lying in bed next to him, I stared at the ceiling and asked myself a question I had been avoiding for weeks. If the person you love doesn't protect you in rooms where you're being erased, do they really love you at all? It arrived on a Thursday afternoon. I was reviewing quarterly contracts at ArvisChain's downtown office spreadsheets, open Slack notifications, pinging white noise machines humming in the background. Then came the ping, a forwarded email from one of our junior devs. Subject line, "Is this meant for you?" Attached was a thread, 3 messages deep. The most recent was from Nathan. It had been sent to what looked like a company alias 1 digit off from a shared inbox address I used for our legal team. But instead it had landed in my personal archive, my old archive, the one I hadn't used in over a year. I opened it, heart still, breathing normal, but as I read my fingers stopped moving. The message was short, terse, professional. Nathan had replied to a prior email from Claudia. His words, "If she understands what's necessary, we all win. If not, we can delay the partnership a quarter. Frame it as a market recalibration. Either way, she'll land where we need her." There was no name, no Elise, no specifics, just she, but I knew. I sat back in my chair blinking once, twice, then read it again. If she understands what's necessary, what exactly was necessary, and why did it need to be framed? The second message from Claudia was colder, more calculated. She wrote, "We've been generous with patience. The architecture press is prepped. It's not hard to reposition this as a misalignment of vision. The firm can weather it. Nathan will recover. I'm less sure. I'm less sure." The sentence dropped into my chest like a pebble in a glass of water. It didn't splash, it sank. I stared at the screen for a long time, not out of shock, but because I needed to see it without blinking, to make sure it was real, to make sure I wasn't imagining tone, to make sure I wasn't reading grief where there was only grammar. This wasn't strategy. This wasn't about timelines. This was positioning. This was war room language. And I was the case study being revised in real time. I didn't reply to the junior dev. I archived the email, marked it, tagged it, stored it in a new folder. Then I closed my laptop, sat back, and for the first time in my adult life, I didn't know what day of the week it was. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because everything had suddenly reorganized itself. Like a room you thought was familiar, and then someone switches the lights, and nothing is where it should be. That night, I watched Nathan cook dinner. He made risotto, poured wine, told me a story about a difficult client in Boston. I nodded, smiled when appropriate, laughed on cue, and in my mind I replayed his words, "She'll land where we need her." Where exactly was that? And who was we? Because if you're planning someone's landing, you've already assumed they're falling. 3 days after the email, my CTO walked into my office. Alex, mid-40s, former aerospace engineer, zero tolerance for corporate theater. He was holding a printed request form, which already told me something was wrong. We hadn't printed internal memos in over a year. He closed the door behind him and said, "Did you authorize this?" I took the paper, read the header. It was a feature request submitted by a Wells Atelier operations lead. Except, it wasn't just a feature, it was access. They wanted expanded visibility into our financial routing tools, the ones we custom built for partner confidentiality, the ones even our CFO couldn't touch without clearance. The language was slick, dressed in project jargon, phrases like workflow optimization and cost forecasting. But underneath it was a backdoor, not illegal, not overt. But if we approved it, Wells Atelier would gain passive access to every margin marker we tracked, including client sensitivity scores. In short, they'd know who we negotiated harder with and where we made the most money. I looked at Alex, Who sent this? He tapped the top corner. Came through Claudia's executive assistant, marked urgent. Twice. I felt something cold press behind my ribcage. Not anger, not panic, just compression. I handed the paper back. Don't reply, and don't delete it. Just tag it, and route any future correspondence through me. Alex nodded, paused, then asked, "Are they under the impression that we're family, or that we're owned?" I didn't answer. He tilted his head. "Hate to say it, Elise, but this feels personal, not business." I nodded. It always does when the lines are already blurred. That night I checked our integration logs. 5 minor requests had come through in the last 2 weeks, all from Atelier's IT team, all asking for low-level adjustments that seemed innocuous. But together, they'd given Atelier full visibility into 3 of our predictive behavior modules. They hadn't breached anything. They'd just walked in. Because someone left the door cracked. I called our internal compliance lead, asked him to start pulling audit trails, quietly. I didn't use the word surveillance, but I did say, if anyone asks, this is a latency review. If no one asks, document everything. The next morning, Claudia emailed me directly. No preamble, just a 3-line message. "We noticed some latency in the dashboard alignment. I assume your team is adjusting. Let me know if you need assistance. We're happy to step in." Happy to step in. I stared at the screen, not because of what she said, but because of what she assumed. That I'd read the overreach as helpfulness. That I'd allow erasure to dress itself up as collaboration. I forwarded the message to my legal team, blind copied our head of data infrastructure, then closed the laptop without replying. When I got home that evening, Nathan was in the kitchen pouring wine. He looked up, smiled, said, "Mom told me you're reviewing the integration points. She said she might have pushed too hard. Just let her help Elise. She's trying." I nodded slowly, then asked, "When did she say that?" He thought for a second. "Yesterday. No, Monday, I think. Except Monday was before I'd even seen the request, before I'd told anyone." And just like that, the timeline frayed. After that night, I stopped sharing my calendars, stopped leaving documents open on shared drives, stopped assuming that being polite was the same as being protected. I didn't confront Nathan, not yet. I didn't want a scene, I wanted clarity. And clarity doesn't come from noise, so I pulled back, quietly. I requested an internal audit, labeled it routine systems hygiene, but flagged every Wells-related integration with a priority status. Red team review, code access logs, behavioral drift checks. No one asked questions. They were used to my rhythms. That's how power protects itself when it's smart. It doesn't shout, it documents. The audit revealed 5 anomalies, none fatal, all intentional. Subtle triggers that redirected certain analytics streams to shadow dashboards. In plain terms, Claudia's team had been watching our internal forecasts not in real time, but close. They knew which contracts we were chasing, which clients were hesitant, which markets we were shifting away from. Not illegal, not technically even unauthorized, but deeply unethical. And worse, personal. They weren't studying ArvisChain, they were studying me. I printed every anomaly, bound them into a report, labeled it Wells Oversight, Preliminary Assessment. Then I locked it in my office safe and started working from home. I didn't tell Nathan. Instead, I asked more questions about his mother, about the New York office, about his thoughts on legacy, and how much say spouses should have in family decisions. His answers were always polished, rehearsed almost, like someone who'd learned how to manage expectations long before he'd ever had a reason to. One night over dinner, I asked him if someone challenged the Wells name publicly, what would happen. He didn't blink, just cut into his steak and said we'd recover, but they wouldn't. He said it so gently, so matter-of-fact, like it was the weather. That was the moment I knew Nathan didn't protect his family. He served it. That same night, I sat alone in my study, poured a glass of water, opened a drawer I hadn't touched in years. Inside was an old watch. It belonged to my father. Classic, simple, silent. He used to say, "Not everyone deserves your fight, Elise, but if you do fight, make it the kind of war that ends things forever." I never understood what he meant, until then. So I began building my war. I contacted an old classmate at Stanford Law, not to sue, but to learn. About corporate disengagement, about IP firewall clauses, about what it would take to extract a system from a hostile integration without a single headline lawsuit or traceable grudge. And while I built, I smiled. At dinners, at meetings, at Claudia. I even invited her to an ArvisChain panel on ethics and infrastructure. She declined, of course. Said she was busy mentoring young women at a leadership retreat. I knew the play. She wanted to control the story. What she didn't know was I'd stopped being part of her script weeks ago. It happened at 2:14 p.m., a Wednesday. Sky overcast. I was reviewing board notes in the shared drive when the Slack notification popped up. From Mark, a junior systems engineer on Nathan's team. I had met him twice. Polite, brilliant, a little too eager to please. Message said, "Hi Elise, I think this was meant for you." Attached was a PDF file. No title, just the timestamp. Wells, OPS, Joint Review, Notes, Final, PDF. I paused. It didn't look familiar, but something a reflex I hadn't named yet told me to download it. I opened the file. 27 pages, internal notes, meeting transcription bullets, timelines, and financial forecasts. At first, I skimmed. The kind of skim you do when your brain is on autopilot. Q3 adjustments, vendor consolidation, standard language. Then I reached page 9, a section labeled Strategic Realignment of External Investment Streams. Under it, in bold, reprioritize Arvis exposure to optimize relational leverage. Deliver messaging in phases. Next to it, in smaller font, a comment bubble. Author Nathan Wells. Text read, "Mom will manage Elise if needed. My role is to maintain her sense of autonomy. No abrupt shifts." I didn't blink, didn't breathe differently, didn't scroll further. Just stared. One sentence. Just 20 words. But they rearranged the entire foundation I had built my life on. Maintain her sense of autonomy. As if I were a perception to be managed. A variable to be handled with timing and care. Not a partner, not a person, a lever. Mom will manage Elise if needed. So casually written. As if I were a line item. A risk factor. A liability dressed in white silk. I read the line again, and then again. Not because I didn't understand, but because I wanted irrationally, desperately to misread it. To find a typo. To convince myself that maybe manage meant support. That maybe autonomy was just bad phrasing. But I couldn't. Because I had heard that tone before. From Claudia. From the way she looked at me like I was a task, not a person. And now I knew Nathan had heard it too. And had chosen to echo it. I sat still. Not in shock. Not even in heartbreak. Just absence. Like something had been pulled out of me quietly, cleanly, without warning. My mind went back to Iceland. To the ring. To the way he'd said, "This isn't about tradition. It's about what we've already built." But it had never been about what we built. It was about what they wanted to own. The next moment was oddly practical. I opened a secure drive, saved the file under a coded name, printed a hard copy, filed it in a folder marked personal. Then I replied to Mark. Short. "Thank you. Please delete from your system and consider this misrouted." No smiley, no tone, just clean, emotionless language. Because what do you say when the man you were supposed to marry plans your perception like a marketing rollout? I didn't pack a bag, didn't leave a note, didn't even tell my assistant where I was going. I just grabbed my coat, my keys, my father's old watch, and drove. The clouds were already folding into each other when I pulled out of the garage. By the time I hit the highway, the rain had started. It wasn't romantic rain, not the kind that makes you want to dance. It was sharp, relentless. The kind of rain that sounds like accusation against glass. I didn't turn on music, didn't call anyone, didn't even use GPS. I let the roads carry me, past the city, past the lights, into the dark where nothing had a name. The farther I went, the quieter the world became. The rain swallowed sound. The wipers moved like metronomes, indifferent, mechanical. Inside the car, it felt like time had pulled over. Like everything had paused to watch me undo something I hadn't realized was fake. I don't remember the moment I pulled into the park. I just remember the gravel under the tires, the way the trees leaned over the road like witnesses, the way the headlights caught only fragments, wet bark, empty benches, the edge of a rusted fence. I turned off the ignition, left the engine ticking in the cold, didn't move, just sat there, hands on the wheel, forehead leaning against the leather, eyes open, and asked the question I had been afraid to ask for weeks. Was he ever real? The man who redesigned my office to bring in more light. The man who taught me to slow down, to breathe, to believe in shared work. The man who said, let's build something together, not just a life, but a legacy. Was that Nathan? Or was that the role he knew I wanted him to play? I tried to remember the first moment I knew I loved him. I couldn't. I could remember the dates, the gestures, the lines, but not the feeling that made it all true. And then I remembered the dinner, the wine, Claudia's smile, Nathan's laugh. The way he had leaned in and said, she does that sometimes. Just go along with it. That line. I had replayed it before, but now it sounded different. Not like amusement, like permission. Like he'd made peace with cruelty, packaged it as culture, and expected me to do the same. I closed my eyes, and I swear for a second I could hear his voice again, not speaking to me, but about me. My role is to maintain her sense of autonomy. He had written it, typed it, proofread it, and probably closed his laptop without a second thought, as if trust were a campaign, not a covenant. I don't know how long I sat there. The windows fogged. My hands turned cold. But my heart was frozen in place. Not broken, not shattered, just stilled. Because when the person you trust the most makes you doubt your own sight, your own instinct, your own worth, the damage isn't loud, it's cellular. When I finally drove home that night, the rain had softened into mist. The city lights shimmered on the asphalt like tiny regrets. I parked the car, walked into the apartment, and left everything, coat, shoes, phone, by the door. I didn't go to bed. I didn't cry. I just sat at my father's old desk, the one I kept in my study, the one I hadn't opened in years. He died when I was 21. Lung cancer, fast, cruel, the kind of goodbye that gives you no space to negotiate. But he left me a letter, a single sheet of paper, folded 3 times, slipped inside a book on ethics I'd borrowed from his shelf, but never returned. I hadn't read it since the day of the funeral, but I remembered every word. Still, I unfolded it again. Because some things, they mean something different after you've been broken. His handwriting was neat, precise. The ink had faded at the corners, but the message remained unblurred. Elise, if you're reading this, it means I've left the room before you expected. I'm sorry for that. There are things I wish I could stay and teach you. How to change a tire, how to forgive your mother, how to know when someone is lying by how they hold their silence. But the most important thing I can give you is this. Don't ever let someone make you pay to be loved. If you have to shrink to be held, if you have to bleed to stay chosen, if you have to explain your worth to someone more than once, walk away, quietly, proudly, without applause. Because love that is conditional is just manipulation, wearing a velvet glove. I paused. My hands trembled, but not from sadness, from something older, recognition. It was like he had written it for this moment, like he had seen it coming. He had never met Nathan, never heard of Claudia, never known what it meant to be a woman with a company, a name, a legacy of her own. But somehow he still knew. I read the letter again, then once more, out loud this time, whispering, to myself, to the room, to him. Walk away, quietly, proudly, without applause. I folded the letter, slid it back into the book, and this time I didn't put the book back on the shelf. I left it open, on the desk, next to a pen, like a lighthouse left on for someone else. And for the first time in weeks, I knew what I was going to do. Not to hurt them, not to make a scene, not to prove anything, but to choose myself with the kind of clarity that doesn't need permission. Because somewhere between Claudia's wine glass and Nathan's email, they had tried to turn me into something small, something predictable, something safe. But my father hadn't raised a legacy. He had raised a woman, and she was done explaining herself. The meeting was scheduled for 8 a.m. sharp. No calendar invite, no subject line, just a direct message sent to each board member the night before confidential strategic review, Elise only. We met in the smallest conference room on the top floor of ArvisChain's headquarters. I chose it on purpose. It had no view, no distractions, just a round table, 8 chairs, and a whiteboard with no history. As each member walked in, I greeted them with a nod. No small talk. No preamble. When the door closed, I stood. No slides. Just a folder. Paper, not digital. I want to thank you all for being here on short notice, I began. My intention this morning is not to alarm. It's to align. What I'm about to present will change our posture, our perception, and our partnerships permanently. I laid the folder on the table and opened it. Page by page, I walked them through it. A Slack message, an email trail, a technical request log, screenshots, audit trails, contract excerpts, and then Nathan's words. My role is to maintain her sense of autonomy. Mom will manage Elise if needed. If she understands what's necessary, we all win. The room went still. No gasps, just silence. The kind that means everyone is doing the math. I looked each of them in the eye. These are not mistakes. They are strategies. We were not seen as partners. We were seen as property. Then I laid out the plan. Step 1, all access points connected to Wells Atelier servers, dashboards, API keys would be disabled immediately. Security Protocol Tier 4, 0 lag. Step 2, a joint statement to press and stakeholders, citing irreconcilable ethical divergences and violation of collaborative integrity. No scandal, no finger-pointing, just fact. Sharp, precise, non-negotiable. Step 3, soft launch of Arvis Lite, a new AI light platform designed for high-compliance markets in Scandinavia. We'd been prototyping it for months. Now it would launch fully sovereign and fully ours. No Wells funding, no Wells visibility, no Wells DNA. When I finished, one board member, Evan, former COO at a Fortune 100, leaned back and said, "You realize this will sever all goodwill with the Wells name?" I nodded. I'm not here to manage optics. I'm here to protect values. Another board member, Priya, smiled faintly. "Thank you for reminding us why we believed in you in the first place." I nodded once, gathered the documents, and said, "This meeting is closed. Implementation begins in 1 hour." As they filed out, no one said a word. But in the quiet, I felt it. Not victory, not relief, alignment. Because real leadership doesn't come with applause. It comes with decisions made in quiet rooms where no one sees the fire you're putting out because you're too busy building what comes next. That morning, I didn't tell anyone at Atelier Wells. Didn't send a warning, didn't return their calls. I simply removed them, cleanly, completely, without apology, because they had tried to claim ownership over something I had built with my own name, my own hours, my own heart. And now they were no longer part of the map. I waited until the press release went live, until the firewalls kicked in, until every portal linked to Wells Atelier returned a soft access denied. Only then did I dial his number. He picked up on the second ring. "Elise." My voice came out calm, controlled, almost clinical. "Nathan." "I'm not calling to fight." He paused, that same pause he used when caught between two loyalties. Then he said carefully, "I figured something was coming, but I hoped maybe you'd want to talk." I took a slow breath. "You already did the talking, in Slack, in email, with your board. Elise, don't." I didn't yell, I didn't cry, but the weight of that one word stopped him. "You sold my trust," I said, "for $750,000. You let your mother name the price for my dignity." Nathan's voice broke. "It wasn't like that. I didn't think you'd ever find out I closed my eyes." That's the problem, Nathan. You didn't think I'd find out. Because deep down you thought I wouldn't question you. Because you believed I'd love you, even if you were silently aligning with someone who planned to break me. He exhaled, shaky. "I didn't want to lose you. I just didn't know how to say no to her. And that's what I needed you to do, Nathan. Just once. Say no. To the one person who thought I was a transaction, not a partner." He went quiet again. Then softly, "I never stopped loving you. I didn't flinch. I believe that. But love that's afraid to protect isn't love that protects me." He swallowed hard. "I didn't think you'd go this far." I let that sit. Then I said slowly, "I didn't go far. I went where I should have been all along, somewhere no one gets to put a price tag on me." Silence again, but this time heavy with understanding. "I won't drag your name through the mud," I added. "This isn't vengeance, it's closure. You made your choices, and I made mine. He whispered. Does this mean we're over? I looked out the window at the city skyline, the same one we'd stood beneath when he proposed. Only now it looked different, sharper, clearer. We were over, I said the moment I realized I was the only one protecting us. Nathan didn't reply. I waited a beat, then hung up, not out of anger, but because the conversation had finally finished itself. And for the first time since Iceland, I felt free. Subject final statement. Dear Mrs. Wells, you once told me over lunch with a glass of Merlot in your hand. There's no such thing as a free entrance into this family. Everyone pays something. I didn't respond that day. I just smiled, folded my napkin, and reminded myself, powerful people don't always shout. Sometimes they whisper. Today, I'm not whispering. I'm writing this letter so there is no misunderstanding. Not between us. Not in the boardroom. Not in the press. You offered me a position in your family on one condition, that I invest $750,000 into your company. You called it tradition. I call it extortion wrapped in legacy. I didn't invest that money. Not because I couldn't, but because the moment love becomes a transaction, it dies. I did not become your daughter-in-law. Instead, I became your cleanest business loss to date. As of this morning, Atelier Wells has been removed from all ArvisChain networks. Every partnership has been legally dissolved. Your access to our AI logistics suite is permanently revoked. Your attempts to override or mirror data have been flagged and preserved for potential legal review. And yes, I did all of it without spending a single cent on you. You see, Mrs. Wells, I don't need to fight you in court. I don't need to compete with your name. I just needed to make sure that no woman after me will ever feel like her worth is negotiable. I remember the first night we met. Red wine on my white dress. You called it a test. But here's what you didn't expect. I wasn't the one being tested. You were, and you failed. Not because you spilled a drink, but because you mistook silence for submission. This will be the last correspondence between us. There will be no lawsuits, no back-channel settlements, no reconciliation dinners, just one clean exit. I walk away not bitter, but better. And you remain exactly as you were, powerful, feared, and more alone than you realize. Sincerely, Elise Harper, founder and CEO, ArvisChain. I never thought I'd become the founder of a foundation. Not really, but sometimes something cracks so loudly in your life, it leaves a permanent echo. You either cover your ears forever, or you learn to make music from it. 3 months after I walked away from the Wells family, I registered a new entity under the Arvis umbrella. Not a new product, not a new division, a new promise. I called it No Dowry Capital. The name made my legal team flinch at first. Are we inviting backlash? One of them asked. But I smiled. Exactly. We're naming the elephant in every boardroom. This wasn't just about Claudia, or Nathan, or even me. It was about every woman who had once stood in a room full of men told to earn her place with silence or money or both. We started small 10-women-led startups from Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia. Founders who had ideas but no connections who had been told. This would be easier if your husband handled it. We rewrote the terms. Every founder we funded got a freedom clause, a legal line that guaranteed her the right to exit any partnership at any stage without forfeiting her dignity, equity, or voice. If that clause had existed in my life a year ago, maybe I would have seen the signs sooner. But maybe I needed the fall. Some nights I'd sit alone in my home office, not the Arvis HQ, but the corner room in my small house, with windows facing west, and scroll through the pitch decks sent to us. Young women with shaky English bold designs and more conviction than resources. They reminded me of myself. Before the boardrooms, before the branding, before Claudia Wells. I didn't answer every pitch. I didn't promise to save anyone, but I promised this. No one who walked through our doors would ever be asked to prove they were worth loving. That was my line in the sand. I wasn't supposed to watch the interview. My PR team advised against it. You've moved on, they said. Let the market speak. Let silence speak. But I watched anyway. Alone, at night. No lights, just my laptop, a glass of water, and the weight of everything unsaid. Claudia looked radiant as always. Perfectly tailored navy blue dress. Pearls. That air of inherited confidence, the kind you can't fake, the kind the world rarely questions. The interviewer started with polite questions about Atelier Wells' generational leadership, the vision for global expansion. Then it came. What happened between you and Elise Harper? The tone was mild, but the silence after the question was sharp enough to slice through screen glare. Claudia's smile barely flickered. Elise was a brilliant collaborator, she said with a tone that could freeze champagne, but she chose to walk away. I don't really know who she is anymore. I paused the video. That line echoed. I don't really know who she is anymore. Of course she didn't. She never tried. To Claudia, I had always been an equation: potential x profit, obedience. The moment I removed obedience from the formula, I stopped making sense to her. But I wasn't angry, not anymore. Because for the first time, I could see the full shape of her world, a fortress built on control and filtered legacies. She hadn't just tried to mold me. She'd tried to preserve a tradition that saw women as transactions and trust as currency. I resumed the interview. The reporter pressed further. There's speculation that your partnership with ArvisChain ended due to ethical concerns. Any comment on that? Claudia didn't blink. Business relationships end all the time. It's unfortunate Elise chose to dramatize the matter publicly. But perhaps that's who she really is. Another pause. No denial, no apology. Just a calculated dismissal. I closed the laptop, not because I was hurt, but because I understood. That moment was no longer about Claudia's version of me. It was about my refusal to live inside her narrative. The next morning, the headlines danced across my phone. Claudia Wells speaks out, I don't know who Elise Harper is anymore. No dowry capital gains traction across Asia and Eastern Europe. Elise Harper's quiet revolution. When walking away builds an empire. And I just smiled. The world didn't need me to respond. Because truth has a strange way of echoing, not when we shout it, but when we no longer have to explain it. I was at a quiet rooftop event in Copenhagen, celebrating the second cohort of No Dowry Capital. It was a simple gathering, no press, no speeches, just women who had built something out of nothing, laughing over white wine and solar-powered heaters. That's when I saw her, dark green pantsuit, hair pulled into a neat bun. She had that look I'd seen before in myself, composed but forged through fire. She stood across the terrace holding a glass of something citrusy, talking to a younger founder from Lagos. When our eyes met, she smiled. And I remembered, she was her, the woman I'd once read about, the one who was engaged to Nathan's older brother, the one who vanished from the Wells family narrative without explanation. They used to call her too idealistic for legacy business. I used to believe that line. Now I knew what it meant. She walked over. Elise Harper, she said softly. I never got to thank you. I blinked. I'm not sure what for. She smiled, not bitter, not triumphant, just tired and kind. When I walked away from my engagement to Julian, I thought I was the problem. I wasn't ambitious enough. I didn't understand the game. That's what Claudia told me. I nodded. She said something similar to me. Except mine came with a price tag. She laughed. Figures. There was a long pause. Then she said, but when I saw your foundation, when I read about what you'd done, how you'd walked out on your own terms, I realized I wasn't crazy. I just got out too soon to know the whole system. I felt something swell in my chest. Not pride, not ego. Just a quiet understanding that even pain can build bridges we never meant to cross. I didn't build the foundation to make a statement, I said. I just wanted to make sure women like me, like us, never had to apologize for not buying their seat at the table. She nodded. And in doing that, you gave a lot of us a map. I thought I was walking alone. Turns out I was just walking before the trail was lit. That line stayed with me. We didn't exchange business cards. We didn't make plans to collaborate. We didn't hug. But in that quiet rooftop air, I felt something shift a chapter close. Not with revenge, not with applause, but with recognition. Sometimes legacy isn't about what you build. It's about what you undo, so others never have to bleed just to belong. I used to believe that love could fix anything. That if I gave enough, proved enough, waited long enough, they would see me, value me, let me in. But I was wrong. Some doors don't open because you deserve to enter. They open because you've paid a price they already decided was fair, even if it cost you your soul. That's not love. That's a transaction dressed in tradition. And I wasn't born to be anyone's currency. When I walked away from Nathan and his family, I didn't feel brave. I felt hollow. Like something sacred had been emptied out of me, not because I lost them, but because I realized I never truly had them. What they wanted wasn't a partner. They wanted a proof of loyalty. But love is not a test. And loyalty should never be measured by sacrifice alone. In the months that followed, I didn't burn bridges. I didn't sue. I didn't leak emails or post angry think pieces on corporate ethics. I just worked. I built something that didn't require anyone to pass a gatekeeper. I created space for women who had always been told they were almost enough, too intense, too soft, too expensive. And in doing so, I found something I never expected to find again. Peace. Not the kind that comes from forgiveness, because I haven't forgiven yet, but the kind that comes from no longer needing to be understood by people who only saw me as potential leverage. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt like you had to buy your worth, if someone told you your love only matters if it comes with a resume or a dowry or an apology, walk away. You are not ungrateful for saying no. You are not dramatic for setting a boundary. You are not selfish for protecting the parts of you that don't survive under conditional love. And you don't have to be cruel to be clear. You just have to decide, will you be their lesson or your own legacy?